I drove through all of it. The rain started somewhere around the 40-minute mark, the kind that doesn't bother announcing itself. No build, no warning rumble. Just suddenly the windshield was a wall of water, and the wipers were doing their best impression of keeping up. I had the heat on too high, and the music off, because I couldn't decide what you listen to when you're doing something you haven't fully admitted you're doing yet. So I drove in silence, with the rain, and the hum of the engine, and the particular quality of dark that only exists on state highways at 11 o'clock on a Thursday night when every reasonable person in your life is asleep and you are 3 hours from home driving toward a woman who texted you 2 words. The 2 words were, "I'm fine." I want to be clear about something. Nobody who is fine sends a text that says, "I'm fine." Nobody who is fine sends it at 9:47 on a Thursday, unprompted, in response to a voice message you left 6 hours earlier because something in her voice during your last call 3 days ago had sat wrong with you, like a piece of furniture moved 2 inches from where it belongs. Technically fine. Functionally wrong. I had called to check in. She had not called back. She had sent 2 words at 9:47 at night, and I had stared at them for 11 minutes, and then I had put on my coat, picked up my keys, and started driving. This was not a recommended life choice. I made it anyway. My name is Callum Reed. I'm 36. I do architectural drafting for a mid-sized firm that specializes in the kind of buildings you pass every day without thinking about. Medical centers, libraries, the glass front office, parks along the edge of every city that exists to house the administration of other things. It is quiet work. I like it. I like that a building has to make sense from the outside and from the inside simultaneously, and that the ones that fail are usually the ones where someone chose aesthetics over structure, beauty over load-bearing truth. I have spent a long time believing this is only true of buildings. Her name was Nora Walsh. She was 33. She ran the events program at a community arts center in a town called Millhaven, 3 hours north, which she had told me, when we first met, was a real place and not something she had invented to seem more interesting, though she acknowledged the name did not help her case. She organized exhibitions, workshops, visiting artists, the kind of programming that gets cut first and defended hardest. She was the kind of person who ran on strong tea and the private certainty that doing the right thing by people was worth the admin, even when it wasn't, especially when it wasn't. We met because a mutual friend had trapped us both into the same dinner party and then canceled on it. This was 14 months ago. 7 of us were supposed to be there. What arrived was me, Nora, a corkscrew, and a dining table full of food that our friend Marcus had clearly spent the whole afternoon making before his back gave out and he was legally prohibited from hosting. Nora arrived first, found me on the step, and said, with the flat certainty of someone reading from a document, "He's not coming, is he?" I said I had a text saying he was resting but would be there soon. She said that was what people said when they weren't coming but didn't want to ruin the evening. Then she picked up the bag of groceries she had brought for a dinner that was no longer happening and said, "Do you know how to cook any of this, or are you also useless?" I was, it turned out, somewhat useful. We cooked Marcus's dinner without Marcus, in Marcus's kitchen, and we ate it at his table, and we talked for 4 hours about things I have never talked about at a dinner party in my life, and at the end of the night she put her number in my phone under the contact name Nora and said, "Tell Marcus we ate everything. That'll teach him." She had a small ceramic mug she traveled with, her own mug carried in her bag, for places that provided only paper cups. Pale blue, chipped on the handle, with a faint ring inside from 10,000 cups of tea. She brought it to everything: meetings, train journeys, conferences she was obligated to attend and would have preferred to skip. I had seen it on her desk in Millhaven, on my kitchen counter when she stayed over, once balanced improbably on the dashboard of my car on a road trip we took in September, for reasons that neither of us had formally agreed made sense. For 14 months, I had been the person she called when something was good, and the person she called when something was bad. And I had been telling myself, with the sincere dedication of someone memorizing a foreign language he had no intention of speaking, that this was enough. That friends were what we were. That the distance between us, 3 hours on a clear day, more in rain, was the practical reason, and not the emotional excuse, for a line I had drawn, and then spent 14 months standing on the wrong side of. The something wrong had started 2 weeks ago. She had been quieter. Not absent. Nora was not the kind of person who disappeared without explanation. She was too conscientious for vanishing. But quieter in the particular way of someone who has turned a volume down rather than off. Her texts had the right words in them, but landed with less weight. She had canceled our standing Friday call once, then again, with reasons that were real, and still felt like scaffolding around something she wasn't saying. 3 days ago, I had called. She had answered, and we had talked for 12 minutes, and at the end of 12 minutes I had a feeling in my sternum I could not name, but which I associated with buildings whose blueprints had structural gaps hidden on the 3rd or 4th page. Something was not load-bearing that was supposed to be. I left a message the next morning. She sent 2 words 9 hours later. I'm fine. I stopped once. Somewhere around the 90-minute mark there was a petrol station with the blue-white fluorescent bleakness of every petrol station that has ever existed at midnight, and I filled the tank and bought a coffee I didn't drink and stood in the car park for 3 minutes, thinking about what I was actually doing. I was driving 3 hours in the rain to the apartment of a woman I had not told the truth to in 14 months, because she had sent me 2 words, and I had decided, in the unscientific and undefendable way of all the decisions that matter, that 2 words from Nora Walsh at 9:47 on a Thursday required a physical answer. This was not a reasonable way to operate. I was aware of that. I got back in the car. I arrived at her building at 12:53. The rain had softened to the kind that doesn't commit, neither stopping nor properly falling, just existing in the air as a general atmospheric disagreement with your presence. Her lights were on. 3rd floor. The windows she'd shown me on a video call once when she was describing how the building caught the afternoon light, and how she'd rearranged her whole desk to face it, and how it was the most deliberate thing she'd done to that apartment since moving in. The lights were on at 12:53, which told me she hadn't slept, which told me I'm fine was doing a lot of structural work it wasn't built for. I buzzed. I stood in the wet under the overhang that did approximately nothing to block the rain, and I buzzed, and I waited. There was a pause long enough that I became aware of the sound of water coming off the overhang onto the concrete behind me, and the distant sound of a car somewhere on a street I couldn't see, and my own heartbeat, which was behaving as though it had something to be embarrassed about. Then, the intercom crackled. Cal? Her voice, staticky and small. 12:53 on a Thursday night, and she sounded exactly the way she had sounded on that call 3 days ago. Present. Careful. The volume turned down. Yeah, I said. Another pause. What are you? She started. Then she stopped. Then the door buzzed open. I took the stairs because there was no reason not to, and because the stairs gave me 15 seconds to decide what I was going to say when I got to the 3rd floor. And because I didn't decide anything, which is about what I expected from myself. The hallway smelled like an old building in the rain, something between wood and stone, and the particular warmth of a space that has been inhabited a long time. Her door was at the end of the corridor. The light under it was thin and gold. She opened the door before I knocked. She had clearly not been sleeping, which I had already determined, but it landed differently in person. She was in a gray sweatshirt that was too large for her. The kind of too large that happens when you buy something for its specific shapelessness, for its exact quality of not requiring anything of you, and her hair was up in the loose, accidental way it went when she'd stopped caring about it hours ago. She had the ceramic mug in her hand, pale blue, chipped handle, the faint ring inside. She looked at me. I looked at her. "You actually came," she said. Not a question. Not quite a statement either. The kind of sentence that exists in the space between. The sentence you say when the world has just reorganized itself in a way you had assigned very long odds, and the reorganization turns out to be something you'd been hoping for so quietly, you'd stopped admitting to yourself that you were hoping. That sentence did something quiet to the room. I was wet. I was aware that I was wet in the specific humiliating way of someone who has just driven 3 hours in the rain and is now standing in a doorway, looking like a weather event had personalized its attention. I was aware that what I had done was, by most metrics, not a thing that friends do. Friends send texts back. Friends call. Friends do not drive 3 hours in the rain past midnight because of 2 words. I had driven 3 hours in the rain because of 2 words. "Your text worried me," I said. "I said I was fine," she said. "I know," I said. Something moved across her face. Recognition, I think, of the same gap I had identified. She looked down at the mug. Her thumb moved around the chipped edge of the handle, the automatic gesture of someone touching something familiar for something to do with their hands. "It's late," she said. Not unkindly. More like she was accounting for things. "I know that too," I said. "How long did it take you?" 3 hours. A bit. She looked up. Her eyes were tired, not the empty tired of exhaustion, but the heavy tired of something she had been carrying at weight for longer than was comfortable. In the particular posture of a person who is very good at carrying things and has therefore been trusted, repeatedly, with too much. "You should come in," she said, which was the most Nora thing she could have said. Practical and true, a smaller sentence inside of which a larger sentence was quietly sitting. She moved back from the door, and I came in out of the rain. Her apartment at 1253 on a Thursday had the quality of a place that had been lived in while alone, in the particular kind of alone that has texture to it. There were books on the table she had clearly been moving between rather than reading. The way you cycle through distractions when nothing distracts you. There was a blanket on the couch with the specific depression of someone who had been sitting there in a way that required an anchor. There was another mug on the counter, the beginning of a cup of tea she had not finished making. She set her mug down on the kitchen counter and stood with her back to it, looking at me, and I thought about what I had been planning to say in the car. All of it. The reasonable version, the careful version, the version where I asked what was wrong and she told me, and I was supportive in the specific selfless way of someone who is very sure of what he is and is not allowed to want. I had been planning a load-bearing wall. I was going to check in. I was going to be useful. I was going to drive 3 hours in the rain and be exactly the thing I had been for 14 months. Close enough to matter, far enough to be safe, and then drive home again in the morning, having done the right thing in the wrong direction. "Nora," I said, "what happened?" She was quiet for a moment. And then, she told me. It was not one large thing. It was the thing I had suspected, which was that it was several smaller things arranged in a pattern that added up to something heavy. A grant application that had been rejected after 4 months of work. A board member at the center who had started asking, in the careful language of boards, whether the events program was delivering value. A phone call from her mother about her father's health that had been worse than the last one and better than the next one would probably be. And underneath all of it, something she identified with the careful language of a very precise person trying not to be melodramatic, as the feeling that I have been putting everything into things that keep not holding. I listened to all of it. She talked for 20 minutes, standing in her kitchen, and her voice did not waver. Because Nora Walsh had strong feelings about not letting her voice waver, but her hands did the thing they did when she was working through something hard. The small, controlled movements of a person who is physically managing what they're not letting out any other way. When she stopped, she looked at me with the expression of someone who has just handed over a substantial amount of their own weight and is not sure whether they should have. "Thank you for telling me," I said. "Thank you for coming," she said. "You didn't have to." And that was the moment. Right there. The exit door, standing open, politely offered. "You didn't have to." The clean and forgiving version where I said, "Of course, any time, that's what friends are for." And she said, "You're a good friend," and we both went to sleep on opposite sides of a very clear line. I had been standing on the wrong side of that line for 14 months. I was tired of the commute. "Nora," I said, "I want to tell you something, and I need you to know that it is not related to anything you just told me. I am not about to do something because you're having a hard time. I was going to do this anyway. I just need you to know that so it doesn't feel like that." She went still. Not dramatically. Just still. "Okay," she said, very carefully, like she was stepping onto ice she hadn't tested yet. "I drove here tonight because your text worried me," I said. "That's true. But that's not why I drove here. I drove here because I have been finding reasons to drive to Millhaven for 14 months, and this was just the one I was willing to admit to." And I stopped. I organized the next sentence with the same care I would give to a load-bearing wall, because it was. "I think I have spent 14 months being exactly the right distance from you to be safe, and I am done being safe about this." She looked at me for a long time. Outside, the rain was still doing its non-committal thing against the windows. "Cal," she said, and her voice did the thing she'd been preventing it from doing for the last 20 minutes. "You don't have to say anything," I said. "We can have tea and you can tell me more about the board member, and I will be genuinely helpful and drive home in the morning. If that's what you want." "It's not what I want," she said. Something in my chest shifted. Not dramatically. Just enough. "Tell me what you want," I said. And this is the part that I think about now, when I think about that night, which I do, more than I would probably admit in most contexts. She didn't say it immediately. She picked up the mug. She put it down. She looked at the window that caught the afternoon light she'd rearranged her desk for. And then she looked back at me, and she said, with the quiet precision of someone who has been saving a sentence for a very long time, "I changed your contact name. A while ago, I didn't tell you because it felt like information I was keeping for myself. But it's been that for 8 months, and every time you call, it comes up on the screen. And She stopped. "I think you should know what it says." "What does it say?" I said. "It says home," she said. "I changed it to home after the September road trip, and I've been looking at it every time you call for 8 months." The sentence had been sitting behind her teeth for 8 months, and had finally come out. Not all at once, but one careful word at a time, each word braver than the last. I crossed the kitchen in the way you cross spaces in dreams, without being aware of the distance, only of the arrival. I did not grab. I did not rush. I put my hands on either side of her face the way you hold something that matters, carefully, with both hands, so nothing gets dropped. I drove 3 hours in the rain, I said. I know, she said. You should probably update a few more contact names, I said. And she laughed, once, the real laugh, not the performance laugh, not the polite one, but the laugh that came from somewhere that had been closed for a while and had just, very quietly, opened. Then she reached up and held my wrists the way she had held the mug. The automatic gesture of someone touching something familiar to believe it's real. We stayed in the kitchen for a long time. It was nearly 2 a.m. Outside, the rain finally made a decision and stopped. I did sleep on the couch. She made me, with the specific thoroughness of someone who had a point to make about it and also cared about the structural integrity of whatever we were starting. The couch was old and slightly tilted. I slept better than I had in months. 3 weeks later, she moved the ceramic mug to my flat. Not officially. She left it on the counter one weekend, and when she went to pack it up on Sunday evening, she paused, with her hand around the chipped handle, and looked at me with a question she didn't ask out loud. I said, "Leave it." She left it. The mug has been on my counter for 11 months. I refill it most mornings. The ring inside is a little deeper than it was. A year after the rain, she got the grant, a different one, bigger, for a program she'd been trying to build for 3 years. She called me first. She called me from the arts center, standing in the room she'd spent 14 months trying to save, and her voice was bright and shaking, and she said, "It came through, Cal. It actually came through." And I sat down on the floor of my office with a feeling in my chest that I had long since stopped trying to architect into something manageable. Years later, when people ask how we got together, she tells the story of the contact name, and I tell the story of the drive, and we have a small argument about which of us was braver, which neither of us wins, which is the point. But there's a version I keep to myself. The version where I'm standing at a petrol station at midnight with an untouched coffee, in the rain, thinking about whether to turn around. The version where I almost did. The version where I got back in the car anyway. Because I'm fine in her handwriting, at 9:47 on a Thursday, felt like a building with a structural gap on the 4th page. And I had spent long enough in the blueprints to know that the buildings that fail are the ones where someone chose safety over the truth of what was load-bearing all along. It probably always had been her. It felt late. Late in the best possible way. What would you have done if someone you loved sent you 2 words in the middle of the night, and something in you just knew they meant the opposite? And have you ever been holding a feeling so long it found its own name before you did? Tell me your story in the comments. If this one got to you, leave a like, subscribe, and I'll see you in the next video.